When I asked what time the engagement dinner was, my daughter said, "Oh, we had it yesterday." So I stood there in my Virginia kitchen, a warm Pyrex of cornbread casserole steaming in my hands, the foil crackling like it was judging me. The fridge hummed, the ice maker coughed, and my bare feet chilled against the tile while her diamond flashed on my phone screen like a tiny lighthouse. Ashley's voice was breezy, shopping mall casual. It was small, Mom, like I'd misplaced a Tuesday. I smelled lemon pledge and last night's coffee turning sour as I moved the casserole to the counter, my apron suddenly too tight. I'm Margaret Hayes, 66. And in that moment, my ears rang like a fire alarm no one else seemed to hear. She swiped the camera, showing a neat stack of leftover place cards, calligraphy curls spelling everyone's names but mine. And I caught a glimpse of the country club's tan banquettes, string lights twinkling above untouched crab cakes. My phone buzzed with a Facebook tag. Ashley mid-toast, Jake's mother pressed in close, the caption studded with hearts, and the hashtag, your family. My fingers trembled. The Target gift bag I'd stuffed with heirloom recipe cards whispered at my feet. Ashley tucked her hair behind her ear, eyes not quite meeting mine, and said, "We didn't want to make it a thing." My throat went dry, the room tilting, as if the floor had quietly moved an inch to the left. If you're wondering how a mother ends up off the guest list to her own daughter's engagement dinner, I'll tell you how the cracks formed. Polite conversations, swallowed pride, little edits to the truth, until the whole story split open. I remember the first time Jake's family called me Margie, like we were old friends, and the last time Ashley asked me to bring dessert but not opinions. I remember the registry link landing in my inbox before the phone call, and the way my ex-husband said, "Let them handle it," like I was a problem to be managed. I'll show you every step that led from save the date magnets on my fridge to this cold, humming silence. I just need you to hear me the way my own daughter didn't. Because if you believe that a seat at the table should never be pulled out after the plates are cleared, stay with me. If you've ever been edited out of your own family photo, you know the sting that's sitting in my chest right now. I'm going to tell you what I said next, and what I did with that casserole, and how a mother finds her voice when the door's been closed. Subscribe to follow this story, especially if you think no mother should find out yesterday was her invitation. I kept my voice low because if I let it climb, it would break. "Yesterday," I said, touching the foil with the pads of my fingers, feeling the heat that hadn't been invited to any table but mine. "I didn't see anything on the calendar, Ashley." "It was small, Mom," she repeated, that breezy lift on the last syllable like she was asking if I needed anything from CVS. Jake's parents threw it together, very last minute. Behind her on the screen, lights blinked over someone's shoulder. Silverware chimed. And there, again, my name, or rather the empty space where it should have been. I could see the place cards fanned like a deck, curl after careful curl. Jake, Mrs. Whitfield, Dad, Veronica, Veronica. I tasted coffee gone bitter. Ashley's voice skated across the surface of the silence between us. "We just didn't want to, make it a thing." My mouth went dry. The old training kicked in. The kind that got me through night shifts on the surgical floor, through parents' nights where my ex forgot to show, through every school meeting where I swallowed a comment and offered a cookie. "I hope it was lovely," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone who'd practiced being gracious for a long time. It was. She glanced aside, tucked hair that didn't need tucking, and I saw a sliver of Jake's shoulder. "You would have liked the crab cakes." I made myself breathe. In, out. I could hear the hum of my fridge, the tick of the wall clock, the little sigh of air conditioning through the vent. Why didn't anyone tell me? The camera jostled, then steadied. "It was kind of a Whitfield thing," she said, choosing her words as if each one had to be approved. "They wanted immediate family. It got complicated." A tightness moved from the apron band into my ribs. "I am immediate family," I said quietly. "I know, Mom. I know." Her smile had worry tucked beneath it. "It's just, Jake's mom had a list, and we were trying to keep it small. We didn't think you'd want to drive at night." "Down Grove Avenue," I said. 8 minutes. "Right, but Anyway, her ring flashed, catching a bit of sunlight where she'd angled the phone to show the twinkle of strings, the people I didn't know. We're doing a brunch thing next month for the bridal party. You'll be at that. I nodded because the alternative was that the back of my throat would tighten up and my eyes would go traitor. All right, I said. Have a good rest of your day. Don't be mad, she said quick, like she was chasing something that had already slipped across the street. I'm not mad, I said, and we both heard the care I took not to be. I'm just surprised. We'll talk soon, okay? Love you. Love you, I said, and watched the screen go dark, my reflection there in the black. Apron on, hair in a clip, shoulders rounded like I'd been out in a storm and come in carrying it with me. I set the phone face down and slid the casserole across the granite, the foil whispering. The corn smell rose up, warm and sweet, butter and onions, and the little tang of sour cream. The recipe my mother taught me when we still lived in that white rental in Chester. The one with the wobbly porch and the azaleas I coaxed back to life. For when somebody needs comfort, Mama had said, pressing my hand around a wooden spoon. She was right. The kitchen light haloed the steam and I thought, says who they didn't need mine? Says who I am, not immediate? I didn't cry. The tears would come later, sure as the afternoon thunderheads that roll over the James in July. But right then, I rinsed my hands, untied my apron, and picked up the Pyrex with a dish towel folded thick. My bare feet hit the cool tile, then the warmer oak as I padded down the hall to the front door. On the coat rack, the blue cardigan I wore for errand, Runs smiled at me in its sagging way. I slid into shoes, balanced the casserole on one forearm, and stepped onto the porch, the air heavy and green with summer. Across the street, Mrs. Green had a new flag with a cardinal on it, and her hydrangeas were the shade of a clean sky. I crossed over, careful, waved with my wrist because the dish took both hands. When she opened the door, the smell of lavender and the beeping of a blood pressure cuff came with her. "Oh, honey," she said, looking at my face the way women of a certain age look at one another when the weather inside is worse than whatever's outside. "You've been cooking." "For your lunch," I lied, and she let me. She had a bruise the size of a tangerine peeking out from her robe, the remnant of a hip that had tried to give up. Cornbread casserole. "Thought it'd go nice with the green beans Lucy dropped off." "I'll set a plate for you," she said, already shifting. I shook my head, lifted my chin. "Rain check. I just wanted to make sure you had something warm to eat." She touched my wrist. "You bring me warmth every day you wave from that porch." I smiled and left before my throat could decide to do something dramatic. The cicadas were tuning up. The heat lay on my shoulders like a damp shawl. Back home, I set the empty hands of the kitchen on my hips and looked at the counter where the gift bag sat with its tissue paper like a white flag. Inside, the recipe cards waited, my handwriting looping out. First biscuits, then chicken pie, then pound cake with a note about don't open the oven before 30 minutes or it falls in the middle. I had tucked a picture on top from the day Ashley turned 6, face sticky with Pop Rocks, candles leaning like little sailors, me behind her with a haircut I should never have trusted the neighbor to give me, and a pride that could have powered the whole house if Dominion ever failed. I thought about how far back the road ran from that kitchen to this one, the 4 a.m. bus I caught to MCV for those first shifts, the way my sneakers squeaked on the waxing, my bad knee fussing, the smell of antiseptic, and the coffee in styrofoam cups that tasted like hope anyway. I bought Ashley's trumpet at a pawn shop off Midlothian and polished it like it was made of gold. Sat through her practice even when it sounded like a starter motor going wrong. I worked 2 Christmases straight so I could swing enough overtime to put braces on that beautiful mouth and a prom dress on her back that didn't come from some online clearance bin. When her father moved to Arlington and declared himself too busy to drive down except when he wanted to impress someone with the rarity of his sacrifice, I drove her to every practice, every college tour, packed her lunches, scoured thrift at Diversity Thrift for blazers, sewed satin ribbon into her science fair board to make it look crisp. When UVA felt too big and too fancy, I drove her to campus anyway, showed her the rotunda and the sweet shop with milkshakes big as your head, told her there was nowhere she didn't belong. Immediate. I whispered to the kitchen that knew better than anyone what that word meant. On the table, my laptop winked at me. My fingers hovered, then clicked. The tag glowed. A triad of smiling faces where mine was not. "Congratulations," everyone said. Hearts and champagne and tiny rings. Jake's mother, Lydia Whitfield, though she told me the first time we met that I could call her Lydia and then called me Margie like I'd been her hairdresser for 20 years, had posted a photo where she leaned into Ashley, cheek pressed against my daughter's like she'd grown her. Family, she'd captioned it. It wasn't the word itself that stung. It was the gatekeeping underneath, the velvet rope you couldn't always see, but somehow always felt when you bumped it. The first time I met Lydia, we were in Charlottesville for a tasting at a vineyard where the grapes had more money than most people I know. Ashley was in a sundress with those buttons down the front that you don't actually use, and I had ironed my cotton blouse until the iron itself sighed. Lydia wore white linen that didn't dare wrinkle, and pearls that lay against her throat like they owned the place. She extended a hand like a queen receiving a bouquet. "Margie," she had said, long and warm on the vowels. "We've heard so much about you." "It's Margaret," I'd said with a smile. "Because you teach people how to treat you," Mama always reminded me, "and you start with your name." "Of course," she'd laughed, and then never used it again. She took the seat at the head of the table without looking to see if there was another head. "Now, for the table settings, I think we'll keep it simple and elegant. No lace, nothing fussy. Clean lines." Ashley had looked at me. I'd crocheted lace for the edge of table runners in my living room in the evenings, my fingers working while the TV whispered old westerns. I had imagined those runners under vases of peonies in May. I pictured them folded in a cedar chest instead. "Simple is nice," I said, because in that moment, we were choosing our battles. "And food, no casseroles." Lydia laughed, the kind of laughing that wasn't about being funny. "We'll keep it light. People don't want heavy." I'd smiled tightly and reached for a water glass I didn't need. "There's casserole heavy and then there's heavy heavy," I said. My mother's cornbread casserole could make a believer out of anybody. "Bless your heart," she said, and I heard the prefacing clause to whatever came next. "We do things a certain way in our circle." Jake, sweet boy with shoulders like a doorframe, patted her hand. "Mom." I made a list that day in my head. Not a physical one. Those I keep on the clipboard on the fridge with magnets from places we didn't have the money to go. It was a list of when I felt my edges sanded down. When the registry link landed in my email before the phone call did, with $700 pans and a statement mirror for a foyer she'd never cooked or lived inside of, so unlike the sturdy chip bowl I'd bought on clearance with a tiny nick you can hide if you turn it to the left. When they asked me to bring deviled eggs to the first brunch but not to speak when the conversation turned to who sat where, who was acknowledged in which paragraph of the invitation. When the florist asked me directly, "What would your daughter like?" and Lydia answered over me. When my ex-husband, one of those men who had remade himself in the suburbs, splicing himself into someone else's family tree, told me over speakerphone to let the Whitfields handle it because they knew that world. It is a particular kind of fatigue, the slow one, like you've been walking a long, flat road only to realize, after some miles, it was on an incline. You don't get to be 66 without learning to pace yourself up those hills. So I put the laptop lid down and went to the sink. I peeled the foil off another Pyrex, the smaller one, scooped the extra casserole into it for myself. I ate a spoonful standing up, the way I used to at the counter, cramming something between packing lunches and finding clean socks. It tasted the way it always had. Corn and comfort with a little spark of pepper. It tasted like there were still things nobody could mess with. Later, after the worst of the afternoon heat slid off the roof and the boxwood stopped smelling like a hot dog on a grill, I called Ashley again and asked if she could meet me for coffee the next morning. "Just us," I said. She agreed. In that bright voice you can hear has 3 calendar alerts behind it, and we met at the Sugar Shack off Lombardy. She ordered cold brew with oat milk. I got a hot coffee even though it was August because I like the way the cup warms your hands. She wore leggings and a pale pink top with a logo I pretended not to see. I smoothed my skirt, navy, cotton, ironed, and waited for the clatter inside my chest to settle. "I don't want this to be a fight," she started, and there it was, already framed as something I might do. "Me neither," I said, stirring a packet of sugar I don't usually eat. "Were you happy last night?" Her shoulders relaxed. "It was nice. We kept it simple, and the crab cakes were actually good. And Jake made a toast that made me cry." "Did you feel loved?" I asked. She blinked, smiled. "Yes. Then I'm glad." I let the coffee sit on my tongue, and I felt left out. She winced. "I knew you would. What I don't understand," I said, "is why it was easier to leave me out than to have what would have been a hard conversation with someone else." "It wasn't like that," she rushed. "Mom, it was just... Jake's family likes to plan things very precisely. His mom wanted to host, and she's in charge. I supplied it because we were doing a delicate dance, and sometimes you have to step on a toe to keep from being shoved off the floor. She likes to do things a certain way," Ashley said. She had a list, and Jake's grandparents are older, and it was on very short notice, and she wanted to keep the number under 20. It felt awkward to add your mother, I said, hearing the flatness even as I thought, "Lighten it, Margaret. This is your girl. I am not a +1 to your life." Her eyes filled and she swiped at them, frustrated. "You're not. I know you're not. You're my mom." "Then tell her that," I said softly. "I am not asking to host anything I can't afford. I am not asking for a second-line band or a bar with more kinds of bourbon than it makes sense to drink. I'm asking to be in the picture, and I won't call their florist or rearrange their place cards. But I will not be informed, after the photo's taken, that I should have smiled." She stared into her coffee. The hum of the refrigerator behind the counter and the squeal of the door when someone came in or out kept the air moving. Outside, Richmond did what Richmond does. Buses, joggers, the man who sings to himself on the corner, the sky threatening rain it won't deliver. I remembered the time she ran a fever and I sat up all night, her head on my lap, counting the seconds between when her breath hitched and when it smoothed, and wished I could hand her the kind of ease that would fit in a spoon. You never stop wanting to hand your child ease, but at some point you have to hand her courage instead, and the courage may be yours to give as a model, a shape. Jake's mom said, "Immediate family," she said finally, "small." She meant no cousins, no extras. And the part where I fell out of that category, "It's not that you're not family," she said quickly. "It's that the Whitfields have their ways about who does what and what counts for what. I've been trying to navigate. I don't want you to be hurt." Not wanting me hurt would have looked a lot like saying, "My mother comes." I kept my tone calm, because the moment I raised it, she would hear only heat, not content. And I had learned that the hard way during those junior high years, when everything I said felt like a scold, no matter what I intended. I can handle being told the truth a whole lot better than I can handle being edited out. "Mom." She looked up, eyes red but steady. "Please don't make me choose." "I am not asking you to choose," I said, meaning it with a clarity that startled me. "I am reminding you that I exist, and that perhaps Mrs. Whitfield is not the sole narrator of what counts." She swallowed, nodded, picked at the napkin. "She isn't. I'll talk to her." We sat a while, and I told her about Mrs. Green's hydrangeas and the way the cicadas sounded like rattles. She told me about apartment hunting and a painter they loved in Church Hill. We did not solve anything large in that 22 minutes, but we set down a boundary, like a line of salt. Sometimes that's all you can do on a Wednesday. On Thursday, a paper invitation arrived in my mailbox that had clearly been licked by a machine that costs as much as a small car. The bridal shower, hosted by Aunt Tricia, Aunt Carol, and family. The address the same country club with the matching tan banquettes. "Ladies only," it said in delicate script. "Light luncheon and gifts." At the bottom in small letters, "No children, please. No need to bring anything but yourself. RSVP to Lydia." There was a palette somewhere in the world by which that invitation was measured. All soft blushes and doves. I held it up to the light and looked for my name in a place of honor. It wasn't there. I was on the list, which is different than being expected. The email that flew into my inbox the next morning just touching base, did not improve that distinction. It had bullet points about timing and suggested attire, a note about the gift registry again, and a parenthetical about how surprise is a fun part of the event, so please limit small talk about it with the bride. I liked the way the email imagined me wandering the neighborhood, announcing themes to passerby. I clicked reply, wrote, "Thank you, I'll be there," and left it at that, because sometimes you answer a certain kind of tone by not giving it anything to climb. I called my ex-husband Russell, because there are times when you think maybe somebody who knew you once can remind you that you're not crazy in the way you feel. He answered on the third ring, the sound of golf on low taking up whatever didn't belong to his voice. "Ashley told me you were upset," he said. He'd gotten better over the years at the kind of diplomacy you pick up in corporate retreats, where you're taught to call a storm a learning opportunity. "I am," I said. "I learned about an engagement dinner after it happened. Lydia probably wanted to handle it," he said. "They're that type. Don't look. The wedding is going to be a lot. Let them handle it. Show up. Smile. People will remember Grace. They won't remember seating charts. They'll remember who was in the picture," I said. "Margaret." He shifted. I could hear it. "You're making yourself miserable over nothing." That we were once married did not obligate me to consider his definition of nothing. I found, unexpectedly, that I did not feel small as he intended. I felt suddenly very much my full height. "I hope you enjoy your weekend," I said, and hung up with careful calm. That weekend, on Saturday night, I made myself fried green tomatoes, set my little table with a placemat I'd gotten at Carytown, folded the napkin like I used to for Ashley when I wanted to dress up an ordinary day. I poured a glass of sweet tea and put on Al Green low, and as I ate, I wrote. Not an email, not a text, not some comment that could be screenshot and dissected. I took out the good stationery my sister Brenda gave me the Christmas after Mama died, the paper thick and forgiving, and I wrote a letter to my daughter in my own hand. I told her about the day I went into labor and sustained myself through those last hours thinking about grits with butter and strawberry jelly on toast. I told her about the time she fell off the monkey bars, and I drove too fast to the ER while singing "You Are My Sunshine," so I wouldn't cry. I told her about the ring her grandmother wore, which I sold when she needed braces, because we had some things you wore and some things you used, and there was no honor in a diamond sitting in a drawer while your child's teeth hurt. I told her about the times I failed her too, because that is part of the ledger, and I want her to have an honest book. The time I yelled when she spilled orange juice on the first day of school, and then cried in the car, because it wasn't about orange juice at all. The time I didn't come to field day because I believed my boss when he said I could leave early, and then didn't fight for it enough. I told her that love is sometimes casseroles, and sometimes boundaries, and sometimes taking the keys away from yourself when you want to drive over to someone's house and force them to see you. I told her she came from women who know how to stretch a dollar and a stew and a truth, and that while I did not need a seat at the head of any table, I will always want to be near enough to pass the salt. I sealed it. I tied the recipe cards with baker's twine. I got out Nana's quilt, white with tiny blue stitches like somebody had sewn down rain, and laid it across my lap and smoothed a corner. The quilt needs to go with her when she sets up a new home. I had been saving it for the moment after she shared hers publicly with a man she loved. That after now had a big dent. I folded it anyway and put it in a bag because you can't let someone else's manners determine your generosity. There are little ways of pushing back that aren't fireworks. On Sunday at church, I signed up to bring food for the youth group lock-in and added my phone number to the list for the women's shelter for Wednesday nights. After the service, Mrs. Whitaker from the choir, her pearls are the honest kind, string worn thin, hugged me too long and too knowingly, which told me that somebody had run the small-town phone tree, even though Richmond is too big for such things, and yet is not. "You'll be seen," she murmured, blessing disguised as gossip. I accepted it, as if it came with an anointing oil. On Monday, Ashley called and said, "Mom, can we have dinner Thursday? Jake and his mom want to talk." I cut peonies from the bush I'd coaxed back from sticks, put them in a jar, and set them on the counter. "Here?" I asked. "Could we do their place? They said they'll order Thai." Order Thai, like a ticket to remind me how casual they were. How effortless. as if Pad CU could oil the hinges of a door that had squeaked too long. I considered saying no. There are times when you do not go to a person's house who has been unkind. There are also times when you look them in the eye at their own table and say your name again. "I'll be there," I said. When I pulled up on River Road, I felt like I was driving into a magazine spread. The lawn was shaved close enough to play billiards on. The hydrangeas were the exact shade you see on brochures for wedding venues, and the house had those windows that reached the floor like a dress made for a debutante. I pressed the bell and a chime bigger than most people's weddings sounded off. Jake opened the door with relief on his face like I was bringing water. "Hey, Ms. Hayes," he said, folding me in a hug with those big arms, the kind that would be useful if you had to move a piano or a hurt that wouldn't budge. "Come on in." In the kitchen, white everywhere, the countertops a gleaming ocean, you could see 3 catering bags sitting like obedient dogs. Lydia turned from the stove where she was doing nothing anyone needs a stove for and smiled. I could smell a candle that wanted to be a lemon. "Margie," she said. "Thank you for coming." "Margaret," I said gently, because we were doing names again and you have to be consistent. "Thank you for having me." We made small talk about traffic on 64, about rainfall totals, about how the Boxwoods had some issue everyone was talking about on the news. Ashley poured ice water into cups, and did that thing she does when she's nervous where she lines up the edges of napkins until they pass inspection. Finally, Lydia clasped her hands like she was about to say grace. "I want to apologize," she announced, a thin thread of performance sewing up the edges. "If there was any misunderstanding about the engagement dinner, certainly that wasn't our intent. We thought, considering the size of our families and how quickly we needed to pull it together, it would be simplest to keep it to immediate household." The words lay there with their nice clothes on. I looked at Ashley, who looked at me like she'd left instructions under a rock somewhere that would tell me how to proceed. "I appreciate the apology," I said. "It landed as an exclusion, and it hurt." "I can see how it might," Lydia nodded, internally checking off a task most likely labeled address feelings. "I also want to be clear," I continued steady, "that I am not an extra. I am Ashley's mother. I am immediate family for every definition that includes blood, history, and the person who taught her to keep a jar of change for tolls." "Of course," she said quickly, that little flicker in her eyes that comes when someone hears a thing they did not expect you to say out loud. "It was a matter of logistics." "Logistics," I echoed. "I have navigated more difficult logistics than 20 people at a dinner, Mrs. Whitfield. I have gotten a feverish child to a clinic while ice covered the roads and our car door wouldn't shut. I have found Christmas with $22 and an appetite for joy. I am asking you to consider that I am capable of navigating family." Jake's eyes were wide, respectful, a little frightened, like a child watching 2 thunderstorms approach. Lydia smoothed the side of her linen trousers. "I don't mean to diminish your experiences," she said carefully. "We do have certain traditions, and keeping the event small was in keeping with what we've always done. I honor traditions that make room for people," I said, and I thought of every potluck table I have stood over, moving one casserole 2 inches to the left to make room for someone else's dish, the way women do when they want to extend the meal to whoever comes late. I don't honor invitations with invisible ink. For the shower, I will be there with a smile. For the wedding, I will be in my seat. I would like the program to list me correctly, as Margaret Hayes, mother of the bride, not as an afterthought. I hadn't planned to say that last part. It leapt out on the back of a feeling I'd had when I saw the draft email Ashley had forwarded me for feedback, the one where Lydia had typed, "Parents of the bride, Russell and Veronica Hayes." I had circled it, in red, and thought, she will correct it. And then I remembered every small thing that had rolled downhill. Lydia's mouth flattened. "Well, of course, if that's important to you." "It isn't preference," I said mildly. "It's accuracy." Silence held us like a tight corset. Then Jake, bless him, lifted his chin. "Mrs. Hayes is right. We'll fix the program. And I'm sorry about the dinner. That was on me too." I looked at him. This man my daughter loved. "Thank you," I said. "That means something." We ate Thai food off plates that cost more than my first car. The conversation stayed between plotting points. Safe. When I left, Ashley walked me to the porch, the air soft as breath. We stood under a light that made us both look tender. "I'm proud of you," she said. "The way you said that, it was your voice. It's always been my voice." I smiled. "It just took the long way here." She put her head on my shoulder like she had when she was little. Only then my shoulder was taller than her world. "Mom?" "Yes, baby. Do you think we can do this? The both of you?" I looked at the dark beyond the hydrangeas. The way the night doesn't become less itself just because you switch on a porch light. "We're going to try," I said. "And I'm going to make sure you don't have to hold her hand in mine and pull us along." On the drive home, I rolled the windows down because the humidity had finally let go a little, and the smell of cut grass and something sweet, honeysuckle maybe, came in. I passed the Sonic where we used to get cherry limeades on the first hot day of spring, and the high school where the football field lights look like some government is trying to contact outer space. Richmond was generous the way it is in August when the trees still make their own shade, and the sky holds a little of the late. That night, I took the quilt out of the bag and folded it once more because folding a thing you love and setting it aside is a practice. I slid my hand under the edge, felt the tiny knots, felt Mama's hands there, felt the women before her stitching in the hum of an air that didn't always cool down when you asked. I thought about the reception in some hall with walls meant for photographs, about music loud enough to vibrate your sternum, about a mother-daughter dance that might not happen because some planner thinks it isn't done anymore. I thought about waiting to see if I would be asked, and I decided I would not wait. So I wrote one more note, to the band. "Would you mind learning Landslide?" I asked, and told them why. I asked politely because I am Southern, and because even after all this, I believe people like to help when you let them. I told them I'd pay for the extra hour of rehearsal if I had to. The reply came back fast. "We'd be honored," they wrote. "My mom loves that song too." The week of the bridal shower, I baked pound cakes like currency. I wore the blue dress Brenda says makes my eyes look like summer glass. I walked into the country club with my shoulders back and my chin level, and my name like a password I didn't have to whisper. There were women in little hats and cucumber sandwiches cut into shapes that made me think of kindergarten. Lydia kissed the air next to my cheek and told me I looked lovely, and I told her the same because you can always find something true to say if you look long enough. Aunt Tricia told a story about Ashley's first Thanksgiving with the Whitfields, where she burned the rolls and everyone laughed as if they had participated in an intimacy. I waited for the silence that always follows laughter, and I filled it with the time Ashley insisted on reading Charlotte's Web to our neighbor's cat, because she was sure the cat was lonely. It made the room real in a new way. When it came time for gifts, Ashley opened the white box with the quilt, and her breath caught the way it does when you remember something you didn't know you'd lost. "Nana's," she whispered, and I watched her hands. How carefully she handled it. How you hold a thing that came from someone who believed you would. There were tears then, mine and hers. Quiet ones. Lydia said, "That's beautiful." And I said, "It is. It holds." And I was talking about more than cotton and thread. Here is the truth I am settling into like a porch chair with a cushion. Not everything that has been done can be undone. And not every door that was closed will open just because you knock politely. But I have doors of my own. I have key rings full of them. Friendship, service, humor, memory, food that has gotten more of us through than we will ever admit. I will stand where I am meant to stand, and I will not shrink. I will not be rude, because rudeness takes more energy than I care to spend, and because it turns me into someone I don't recognize. But I will not be invisible. So when the rehearsal dinner invite came through and posted, "Hosted by the Whitfield family," and the seating chart had me tucked back near a ficus, I sent a note that said, "I would love to say a few words, just 2 minutes, to bless our children." I pressed send and went outside and watered the basil. When Lydia replied with a nice version of no, I wrote the toast anyway, and I tucked it into my purse. And I will find the right moment, because families are not only the ones who make the printed program, they are the ones who make the space when it matters. And when I think about what comes next, Wedding day sun bouncing off the river. Photos with bouquets held just so. The sound check. The way the cake will surely lean even after we ask it not to, because cakes are like people in that regard. I picture something else too. I picture the way a voice feels when it finds its chest again after years of polite and almost, and not wanting to make a fuss. I picture my hand on my daughter's back as she takes a deep breath before walking down an aisle lined with people we know and people we never will, both kinds blessing her as they mean to. I picture one used casserole dish in my sink, a fork left to soak, the small ordinary evidence that somebody was fed. I have a seat at this table. I have always had one, and if someone forgets to pull out my chair, I know how to move it myself, quietly, firmly, and take my place. The older I get, the more I understand that grace isn't a posture. It's a practice. You choose it, like you choose to open your hand rather than curl your fingers. You choose it every day the world seems determined to confuse being loud with being right. You choose it even when what you want is to point and list and hurt back. And then, after you have chosen it and backed it up with truth spoken in a voice you own, you go into your kitchen, you peel back foil, and you eat a spoonful of something warm. You remember who taught you to stir and who taught you to set a place for the person you hope will knock. I'm setting one now. I'm leaving the porch light on. And whatever the Whitfield circle counts as immediate, I know this much. When the day comes, my daughter will look for me in the room. She always has. I will be where she can find me. And if Lydia ever calls me Margie again in a way that trims me, I will smile and say, "It's Margaret," and it will not be a scene. It will be a bearing. The chandelier can sparkle. The banquettes can gleam. I am not reflected in their shine. I carry my light with me. When I asked what time the engagement dinner was, and my daughter said, "Oh, we had it yesterday," something ended. But something started too. I am a mother in Virginia, with a kitchen that's seen more than its share of beginnings, and beginnings often look like a mess right before they look like anything else. You lay out your tools, you preheat the oven, you grease the dish, you claim your spot at the counter, you set your name down where it belongs, and you keep stirring. The next morning I pulled open the top drawer by the stove where Mama's old wooden spoon lives, the one with the burn mark near the neck from when I leaned it against a pot at Thanksgiving and forgot it a second too long. It isn't pretty. The bowl is softened and thin from years of stirring, and the handle fits my palm because my hand learned the shape of it the way you learn the feel of a loved one's shoulder. I washed it, dried it, and slid it into my purse the way some women slide in a lipstick. I told myself it was silly. I told myself I just liked the weight of it. The truth is, before I even had a plan, I had decided. When my voice shook, I would hold that spoon and remember what it had lifted. In the days that followed, small stings kept finding me, the way a late summer mosquito does when you think the season is done. It wasn't a storm. It was a collection of weather. The email from the planner with a PDF of the ceremony program arrived, and at first glance it seemed right. Parents of the bride, Margaret Hayes and Russell Hayes. My name stood where it should. Then I saw the note at the bottom. Please confirm stepmother name for listing beneath. Beneath. It was the word choice as much as the impulse that told me someone still believed there was a ladder. I wrote back, polite as you please. Thank you for your sensitivity. Please list Veronica in the acknowledgments as we discussed. I appreciate you honoring the roles accurately. Of course, came the reply with 3 exclamation points that made me think of a teenager. We'll place her under with thanks. A truce on paper still needs people to show up for it. Ashley texted on a Tuesday. Can you go dress shopping with me Friday? Lydia wants to come too. I can tell her to sit this one out. I thought about declining, keeping myself from another moment where someone else's certainty tried to muscle mine. But there are mother things you don't miss. I'll be there, I texted back. We went to a boutique in Short Pump, where the air smelled faintly of new cloth, and someone who always says yes. The kind of place with 3-way mirrors, and a lady with a tape measure looped as casually as pearls. Ashley tried on a dress that made her look like spun sugar, and another that was all straight lines and modern confidence. She chose something between, a dress that looked like her, soft and sure at once. Lydia stood with her hands clasped, pointing out a strap here or a bustle there, speaking some language of weddings that sounds like a sport. Lace weight, veil length, bar minimum, plated service. When it was my turn to look for a dress, mine, not white, not asking for attention, just something that would let me stand next to my girl without looking like I'd wandered in from a different photograph, the saleswoman took me to a corner rack of acceptable mothers. "We love a champagne, a dove gray," she chirped. "Nothing too bold for photos. Understated is best when you're not the one." Not the one. It was another bruise pressed. I pulled a fabric in a color that makes me think of the inside of a seashell. The tags called it oyster, which felt like a small kindness, because at least oysters are alive. The dress had tiny beads at the neck like a whisper of stars. I stepped out, and Lydia's smile was smooth. "Classy," she said. "Very refined." Ashley looked at me the way she did when she was 6 and asked if I wanted to be Superwoman or just be her mom. "You look exactly like you," she said, and I felt the room widen a little. At the register, the saleswoman leaned in to confirm alterations with "Mrs. Whitfield," and turned toward me. I waited, watched the confusion as she corrected herself. These are the things I could let go. These are the things that pile up when you don't notice where they've left you sitting. We met eyes, the saleswoman and I smiled so she would not carry this tiny awkwardness home like lint. She put her hand to her chest and breathed out. Small mercies sustain more lives than we admit. At the rehearsal dinner, I was in a floral dress Brenda said, "Sings Virginia Garden," which is to say it had peonies and a little swagger. The country club dining room had that damp, cool air that makes you wish for a sweater even in August. There were small vases of roses along the tables, low enough not to block anyone's view of anyone else. My place card did not sit by the parents, nor even by Ashley's high school friends with whom I had passed time in bleachers. It perched at a round in the back near a rubber plant that faked its own breath. Russell was up front, Veronica next to him, her dress the kind of beige that rich women wear as if daring the room to argue they are interesting anyway. I took my seat at the ficus and looked at the centerpiece, a cluster of pale hydrangeas that managed, even in their cut state, to behave as though they hadn't been lifted from a bush. The slideshow started, a ribbon of Ashley through time, from bath time hair that looked like a halo of moss to a teenager bravely playing trumpet at the high school talent show. At first, I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. Then the angle of the photographs shifted, and I felt around the edges for where I used to be. The image of the science fair where I'd hot-glued borders while the dog tried to lick the glue gun. There was the project board. There was my elbow, cropped. The photo of the 8th grade banquet. There were Ashley and her friends, and a mother's hands in the frame placing bracelets on their wrists. If you knew my hands, you'd know them by the faint burn scars on the knuckles. But the photo was mercilessly tasteful, and my face did not belong to the narrative. Aunt Tricia, who is not my aunt, and will not be, but whose own sense of family is so broad it could cover a football field, patted my arm like she had felt the draft. "These things," she whispered, "the slides, the speeches, they're meant to charm the room. The truth always needs more frames than anybody gives it." When the toast started, there were 3 for Jake, each one earnest and full of the kinds of details that make other men laugh. Lydia stood, spoke about Ashley's poise and how quickly she became one of us. Russell offered a neat 2 minutes about pride and promise and the way a father feels, while I sat very still with the toast I had written in my purse because Lydia's email had said there wasn't time. And I had told myself dignity is often quiet. When the pastor said grace, he mentioned the mothers, and his hand went out in a soft gesture in our direction. Lydia folded it into a beam, an acknowledgement she wears well. I bowed my head and laid my hand over my purse, so I could feel the shape of the wooden spoon through the leather. I did not stand. I did not insist. I let the food be blessed over me, and I ate carefully and spoke to the young man beside me about his woodworking hobby, which turned into a conversation about the challenge of making dovetail joints for drawers. "I like how wood tells you what it will do," he said. "You have to listen." I nodded because I understood. I have spent most of my life listening for what a thing wants to become, and I have learned that if you force it, its splinters. The day before the wedding, I called Ashley. "If you want a quiet moment before everything tomorrow," I said, more question than statement, "I'll be on the porch at 9 with coffee and pound cake." She arrived at 9:15, hair in a messy bun, eyes bright with that tired that comes from being loved and looked at and instructed within an inch of your own preferences. I poured coffee and spread butter on slices of pound cake, and we sat on the steps where I have drank more seasons than I can count. "I dreamed last night I couldn't find my shoes," she said, laughing, and I told her about the time I dreamed my car was a refrigerator and I couldn't remember which shelf was gas. After a while, when the quiet had grown comfortable, I went inside and came back with a small linen bag, the kind you'd keep lavender in a drawer inside. "I have something that I meant to give you later," I said, "but I want you to have it now, before the day starts. It will fit better in the morning." I took out Mama's wooden spoon. Ashley cocked her head. She knew it. Of course she did. She had eaten 1,000 soups I stirred with it, mashed 100 potatoes under my hand, while that spoon thumped softly against the pot. "I know," I said, because to someone else it might have seemed ludicrous. "It's not silver. It's not heirloom in any way that would get insured. But this is the thing that fed us. This is what stirred batter for birthdays and stew when the money was thin, and lemon curd that one summer when I wanted to learn something fancy from a magazine. When I didn't know what to do, I stirred. It makes no sense. And yet it does." Her eyes filled with the kind of tears that don't fall, the kind that make the whites shine. "I love it," she said, taking it with both hands the way you receive a baby, like it might flop if you don't show it you're committed. She pressed the spoon flat against my heart, right there, and then brought it to her own. And we were 2 women with a stick of wood and a lineage I could draw for you in casseroles, if not in a family Bible. "Keep it in your kitchen," I said. "Keep it where you can reach it when you don't know what else to do. You can stir air with it if you need to, just keep stirring." At the venue, everything had a plan. There were chalkboards in careful handwriting and a table with escort cards stuck in a little tray of white sand like a beach for very organized shells. The planner had an earpiece that made me think of a spy movie and a binder like an encyclopedia. She smiled at me with the fixed brightness of someone for whom things go wrong professionally. "The bride is in the suite," she said. "Hair and makeup in 5-minute rotations." "Is there a chair for me?" I asked, knowing the answer by the way her smile tilted. "So, only the bridesmaids and the mothers are in the suite," she said. "You can wait in the family room and we'll call you for photos." "I am the mother," I said, and I didn't put teeth on it. I just set down the truth like a cup. She blinked, touched her earpiece, checked her list. "I'm so sorry. The list in my binder had Mrs. Whitfield and Mrs. Veronica Hayes. We'll make room." "Thank you," I said, and I followed her down the hall. Inside, the suite was a hive. Girls with hair in rollers and one in a satin robe tucking bobby pins behind her ear. Glasses with straws so lipstick would survive. A plate of strawberries cut to look like roses. Lydia moved like a conductor, distributing small tasks with grace. She turned when I entered, appraised the room as if she were taking attendance. "Oh, Margie," she said. "We just sent for the florist to fix the loose ribbon on the bouquet. Do you mind waiting in the family room? It gets crowded in here." Ashley had seen me the second I walked in. She came toward me, curls pinned and eyes ringed soft in a way that made her look like the 6-year-old and the 28-year-old at the same time. "Mom, with me," she said. And there it was again. That tether that knows its job. We went to a quieter corner by the window where you could see the James slide by, moving along like time does when you look at it. "You look like every wish I ever had," I said. And she laughed, relieved to have one sentence that wasn't about delivery windows or boutonniere pins. When the photographer came in with his 2 cameras swinging, he looked around for authority. "Mom's first," he called, and I moved toward Ashley, while Lydia came quicker, smoother, practiced. He posed us on either side, Ashley in between, and then he reached for the list clipped to his board. "Now, parents of the bride," he said. "Mr. Hayes and Veronica?" "Margaret," I said. I put my hand up, no more dramatic than you do when you want to offer to pass the rolls. "I am the mother." Veronica can be in the next one. The photographer looked at the planner. The planner looked at Lydia. Lydia's mouth prepared itself to be gracious with a side of correction. Ashley lifted her bouquet and tapped the stems gently against her palm. "I want a photo with my mother," she said. "And then we'll add everyone else. One doesn't replace the other." There it was. That click you hear when two pieces that belong finally find their groove. The camera made its own clicks. We posed. Me on her left, the way I stood on her left when she learned to walk. The photographer said something about how beautiful, and I thought about how he had no idea what beauty he was standing in the middle of. The ceremony went the way ceremonies go. Music, the murmur when the doors open, an aisle she walked down like courage itself. The officiant said all the words with the rhythm of someone who believes language can hold a life. When he asked, "Who supports this couple?" there was no old-fashioned giveaway, and everyone answered, "We do," in a chorus that moved across the room like a wave. At the reception, the tables were named after Richmond streets: Monument, Franklin, Grace. Mine was Grove. I smiled without humor at that, because I have learned where the groves are in my life, and where the fields have been cleared. My card placed me at a table near the dance floor, not the head. I ran my finger over my name and thought about how much of myself has been written in places that didn't use ink. A waiter put his hand on my chair as if to pull it for me, and I sat. The first clink of glass came quickly. That tink-tink that means someone will speak. Lydia rose, thanked everyone for being part of our day, and told a story about Ashley's first Whitfield family vacation to the Outer Banks, when she realized you need 2 coolers instead of 1. People laughed. Russell spoke about watching Ashley become a woman of integrity. He used a phrase about grit that sounded like a keynote he might once have given, and I do not doubt he meant it. I reached into my purse and touched the spoon. It was smooth. It was real. It had never once pretended to be anything it wasn't. I looked toward the band and caught the eye of the lead singer, a woman in a black dress with a braid like a crown. She gave the smallest nod, an agreement telegraphed across a crowded room. The plan in my head, not to blow the house down, not to stomp my foot, not to play a card I didn't need, settled into place like a pie in an oven you've preheated just right. The DJ cleared his throat and announced the blessing. The pastor began, his voice that gentle timbre that asks for quiet when the room is used to hum. He lifted up the couple and spoke petition over their home. When he finished, there was that little pause where the clink of forks hasn't begun, the way a creek has a beat between when it drops off a stone and when it hits the next pool. I stood. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply standing. I held the spoon in my hand, not displayed, not hidden, just there like a touchstone. "If I may," I said, and my voice carried the way a kettle carries, not loud but clear. Eyes turned. Lydia's first. Ashley's next, full of 1,000 things at once. The DJ looked to Lydia, and then to Ashley, and Ashley smiled at me and nodded. That tiny permission no one else had the right to give or withhold. "I'm Margaret," I said into the air, into the moment where women like me sometimes disappear. "Ashley's mom. Thank you for loving my daughter and for loving Jake. Thank you for showing up for them, not just today with your good shoes and your kindness, but all the days after this, when they will need someone to bring over a rake when the leaves pool in the corners, or to sit on the couch and listen when the news isn't what they hoped." A shiver of laughter moved like wind through wheat. I felt my hand loosen around the spoon. I asked a band in Richmond to learn a song, because sometimes music says what we keep inside our ribs. Later, if the bride is willing, I'm going to borrow 2 minutes of dancing. But first, I want to offer something our family has always had inside it, even when it couldn't afford much else. A blessing by way of a recipe. I held up the spoon just enough that people could see the curve. "This is my mother's spoon." She pressed it into my hand in a kitchen where we figured out more things than I can list. She told me, "For when somebody needs comfort." A wedding is comfort and courage all mixed up. So here's the recipe we used when we didn't know what to do. You start with love, which sounds easy because we all think we know what it looks like, but love is also a practice. Add in patience, the kind that waits without rolling its eyes. Mix in humor. You're going to need humor, Because you will burn the rolls sometimes, and you will come home tired, and the dog will have eaten something you needed in the morning. Fold in truth, gently but completely. Don't leave the truth sitting in a bowl on the counter to dry out. And when something clumps, because life clumps, you don't throw it out. You keep stirring. It will smooth. The room was quiet in that way. People get quiet when something rings true against their chest. I looked at Lydia, and I saw in her eyes an edge soften. Not a surrender, but a recognition that she was in the presence of something she did not own. "Ashley," I said, turning to my girl, "you have from the beginning looked for the good spoon in every drawer, figuratively and literally. You reach for the thing that will help you keep going. Keep doing that. Jake, you have the kind of shoulders that carry more than boxes. Carry your part of the stirring, and when she hands you the spoon, don't be afraid to take it. When she drops it, pick it up without saying, 'I told you to be careful.' And when the day comes, and it will, when you don't have the faintest idea what the recipe is, call me, or call your mother, or call your neighbor who waves from across the street. Call anybody who loves you, and we'll stand in your kitchen and stir air with you until the clumps let go." I took a breath. "That's all. Thank you for letting me speak." I set the spoon down on the edge of my plate. It looked like an ordinary piece of wood in a fancy room. It looked like a key. There was a beat. People like to measure a room as if Grace has to pass a focus group. And then a swell of sound. Hands. Not loud, but steady. Ashley's face was wet now, and she did not wipe it in a hurry. Jake's jaw worked the way a good man's does when he isn't afraid to feel in front of other men. We ate. The crab cakes were good, as predicted. There were ham biscuits with mustard that had a heat in it, and deviled eggs with a frill of paprika. I talked with Veronica about her garden. She grows tomatoes in pots and apologizes to them out loud when she forgets to water. And I remembered that people are more than the positions they take up in our lives. When the band started, the floor filled. Nieces twirling like they were in their own music video. Uncles whose knees had seen better days. Friends whose dresses didn't let them do in public what they surely did in private. The father-daughter dance came. Russell took Ashley's hand with a tenderness that has always come easy to him, even when he didn't know what else to do with us. They swayed to a song with too many strings for my taste, and I remembered him in the kitchen once, years ago, trying to dance Ashley on his feet while she squealed, and I forgave him again for 17 things I'd already forgiven him for. Forgiveness is not a one-time meal. It's a pantry you keep stocked because you never know when company will drop by. Then the band leader looked at me and nodded. And a guitar line I have known since the first time Stevie Nicks sang it, across a scratchy radio, slid into the room like a promise. I stood where the edge of the dance floor meets the tables. I did not go fetch Ashley. I did not claim something that belongs to the bride to offer. I stood until she found me, which is what she has always done when it mattered. She came into my arms like a long exhale. We moved in the small circle mother and daughter know, the one that keeps time with a history nobody else hears. When the words about being afraid of changing floated past us, I laughed a little because yes, we were both changing. Change is the tax on joy. My cheek against her temple felt like home feels even when you're not in your house. I didn't say much. She didn't either. Some conversations happen in the spine. When the song said, "I've been afraid of changing because I built my life around you," she squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, and there we were, naming the thing without making it a scene. When it ended, the room applauded in that way it does when it recognizes a moment it hopes to keep. After that, it was all the things receptions are. Cake that leaned in exactly the way I had predicted and held anyway. A bouquet tossed badly and rescued by a girl with quick hands. Someone's tie around someone else's head. Lydia came to me with her lips pressed together and then relaxed them like she'd decided to choose ease. "That was lovely," she said. "Your blessing. Your dance. Thank you," I said. "So was your planning. Everything is beautiful." She looked at the spoon, which I had tucked into my purse again. "I used to stir cookies with one of those," she said. She softened. "Before the KitchenAid. We upgrade our tools," I said. "We keep our recipes. Ashley and Jake left under sparklers that nobody lit near anything flammable. The night air smelled green and a little electric. I stood back and watched my daughter wear the kind of joy you can't purchase. Russell put his arm around my shoulder without thinking about whether he was allowed. We are not who we were, and that is both a grief and a grace. In the days after, people sent photos. The ones that mattered to me were not the perfect ones. They were the ones where my mouth is open mid-laugh, where my arm is around Brenda, and you can see the exact bracelet Mama used to wear, where a child is looking at the cake with the desire of a human who still believes icing is a strategy. The program arrived in the mail because someone mailed me theirs when they realized I had left without one. My name was there where I asked for it, my letters standing steady like each one had a spine. Lydia called a week later. Not a text, not an email, a call, which is old-fashioned and brave. "Margaret," she said, and I noted the syllables with a private gratitude. "I've been thinking about your words." I waited. "I have ways," she said, then laughed at herself, "of doing things. I have ways that have served me, and also ways that have cost. I wanted to thank you for handling what you could have handled poorly. You could have made a scene. You made something instead." "I wanted to make room," I said. "I'm still learning how to do that. Would you, maybe, come for coffee one day next week? Not to plan anything, just to sit." I smiled into my kitchen, where the spoon had been returned to its drawer, and where I could hear the sound of my own life, the ice maker coughing, the water heater clearing its throat. "I'd like that," I said. "I'll bring pound cake. It helps a conversation along." When I saw Ashley after their mini-moon, Charlottesville, and a little cabin near Wintergreen where they played cards when it rained and did not win on purpose, she told me about how they had learned to read each other's impatience, and how the first grocery run is a kind of intimacy you don't hear about in premarital counseling. "Jake buys the name-brand cereal," she said, "and I buy the off-brand and then pour it into the name-brand box. There are 1,000 compromises," I said. "Make them where you can, stand where you must." She looked at me. "You stood," she said. "You did it without making me hold my breath. I learned from you too," I said, and it was true. She'd spoken up. She had said, "I want a photo with my mother, in a room where she could have chosen to smooth everything flat. We are always making each other braver, whether we like the lessons or not." I didn't put the spoon back in the back of the drawer. I moved it to the front, next to the whisk I use for gravies. Not because I need it more often than before, but because I like to see it. It sits there and reminds me that there are tools for living you can hold. It tells me that every time someone tries to rename you small, Margie, extra, +1, you can say your name. Not bitter, not loud, clear. You can take a chair where you are supposed to sit. You can write a letter on heavy paper and send it with enough postage for the weight you're adding to someone's heart. You can ask a band to learn a song and turn a denial into a dance. You can bring a casserole to a neighbor on the day you want to throw it instead, and let your hands perform kindness until your heart catches up. The hydrangeas across the street browned and bowed their heads as summer leaned toward fall. Mrs. Green's cardinal flag faded a little. The quilt on Ashley's couch showed up in a photo she sent me of their first movie night, legs tangled and bowls of popcorn in their laps. In the photo, the spoon lay on their coffee table like it had placed itself there, patient, knowing it would be needed. That made me smile because objects do get into a rhythm with us. They absorb our living and give it back by being present. People will tell this era we're living in using numbers, a count of likes, a seating chart, a guest list. I will tell it in objects, a wooden spoon, a Pyrex dish with a stained handle from years of hot plates, a blue cardigan on a rack waiting to be shrugged into for errands, a recipe card with handwriting that doesn't need a font to make it pretty, a quilt with tiny blue stitches that held in the middle when the edges pulled. I will tell it in voices, the one that forgot to invite me yesterday and remembered me today, the one that called me Margie and relearned my name, the one that laughed at a slide and then fell quiet at a blessing, the one that asked me to dance and didn't let go. It would have been easy, I suppose, to take my hurt and build a wall with it, to move my chair out to the porch and decide the porch was enough. It is enough some days. But sometimes the answer is not a wall. Sometimes the answer is a door you open by saying what needs to be said without trying to knock anyone else down. That's what the spoon has always known. You don't beat the batter into obedience. You turn and turn until the lumps break apart, and the cake rises because it was meant to rise. And that's what I did. When I asked what time the engagement dinner was, and my daughter said, "Oh, we had it yesterday," I felt the floor tilt. I felt like the air had been portioned out, and my slice went missing. But I did not go breathe somewhere else until I lost my own oxygen. I took a breath. I found my feet. I made room where there wasn't any by setting my name down and holding it steady like a plate you pass carefully because you know what's on it matters. I am not immediate because a program says so. I am immediate because when Ashley skins a knee, at 8 or at 38, the person she wants to call has my number memorized in her bones. I am immediate because the spoon knows the way my hand turns when it goes around a bowl. I am immediate because I have a key to a kitchen where my daughter will learn her own recipes, and I will sit at her counter and peel apples while we talk about whatever comes. And when she asks, "How long do I stir?" I'll say, "Until it feels right." And she'll laugh because she hates when I answer like that. And then she'll look down and know. So I stand at my sink, and the light moves across the counter in a familiar path. And somewhere across town, my daughter is finding a place for the spoon that is not mine anymore. The ice maker coughs, the fridge hums, and my bare feet, always a little cold on tile, remind me I am here, immediate and rooted, in this kitchen where the foil on the casserole speaks to me like a friend who doesn't lie. The shows on TV decide their own endings. Life doesn't. It continues. One small act of courage, one plate set, one name spoken well at a time. And if there ever comes another door that closes while I am still in the driveway, I know what I will do. I will go to my drawer, take out the spoon, and feel its smooth neck in my grasp. I will decide if the moment asks for a quiet exit or a public blessing. And then I will keep stirring until what needs to rise, rises. The days that followed my little speech at the reception felt like the slow settling of dust after a gust. People keep telling you that some moments drift away, but some moments also change the very grain of the air around you. Lydia's phone call, her voice careful at first, then surprisingly frank, came like a hand on my shoulder. She wanted to apologize without theatrics. She wanted to tell me about the mother she had been, and the mother she wanted to be. When she said, "Margaret," with the syllables full and unhurried, I felt a small bell inside me ring, as if some forgotten window had been opened. We met, as she'd asked, at a cafe that smells of espresso and lemon oil on a weekday morning. It was a little thing. 2 women with coffee cups between them, and a bowl of sugar packets under a glass dome. She wore a cardigan the color of morning fog, and told me about her grandmother, who had taught her to sprout beans in a mason jar on a windowsill, the way an old habit becomes a compass. She spoke about expectations and how women like us inherit not only recipes, but a way of running households that can feel like rules written in invisible ink. "You were brave at the reception," she said, and I could tell the compliment was part apology and part confession. "I saw you standing there and I thought, God, she's done so much. I didn't think before I acted. I should have." We sat in that bright place and traded the little embarrassments of our lives. Things you keep in private until they're not private anymore, because someone else understands the pattern. She asked me if I would teach her the casserole. Not because she planned to steal my family secrets, but because she wanted to learn a way to make something that felt like home for other people. We arranged a date. It felt oddly ceremonial, 2 women trading not just ingredients but permission. The day we cooked together, I brought the spoon. Lydia came with clean palms and a recipe clutched in a folder that had been used for other things. Receipts, business cards, a note with a phone number to a florist she liked. She looked at the spoon in my hand and paused. The way people pause when an object proves truer than they expected. "You carry a lot in that," she said. "I always have," I told her. "It holds heat, and it remembers what has been stirred in it." We made the casserole like 2 people stitching a seam. Lydia chopped, measured, tasted, And when she hesitated over the cumin, I told her, "Just a pinch." She smiled like a woman offered a small truce. When we ate, she closed her eyes and said, "This tastes like a promise." Then she asked, without jargon or armor, if I would like to come over sometimes, to watch the kids, bring my casserole sometimes when the week unraveled. I felt the charge of 100 small courtesies moving into new positions. It was not victory, it was beginning. Ashley watched all of this with that particular tenderness daughters have for the negotiations between the women in their lives. She called me later that week, from the new little house they'd rented not far from Church Hill. "Mom," she said, like she always has when she wants to be small and brave at once. "We made stew, and we weren't sure how long to simmer. I remembered you saying, 'Stir until it feels right.' And Jake made the first cup of coffee this morning. He forgot sugar, but he was so proud." Her voice broke on the last word in the way that made me put the phone to my chest like a talisman. These were the things that softened me, the small, ordinary proofs that my place had never been measured by a seating chart, but by the daily currency of being there. The week after the wedding, Lydia sent me an email with a photograph attached. It was a candid of Ashley and me at the reception. One of those shots where your laugh is halfway out and your eyes crinkle in the direction of the person you have loved longest. Her subject line read, "For your recipe book." Inside she'd written, "Thank you for sticking to what matters. I did what I always do with a gesture that matters." I made a note, I told Brenda, and I put a fresh card on the clipboard by the fridge. But I also felt a liberty that I hadn't felt in a long while. The kind that isn't loud but is wide enough to move through a life. It was like loosening a corset you didn't realize you'd been wearing. Suddenly, you can breathe in a different way. Those small mercies made room for other things. I started going back to the church kitchen on Wednesday nights. The women there run a warm meal program for folks who sleep near the bridge and for families who are stretched thin. I brought my casseroles and my spoon, and they set me up at a long counter where conversation is as essential as ladling. I learned the names of men who'd come through the shelter and women who taught me how to fold a napkin into a bird. My hands found a different kind of satisfaction, the kind that doesn't ask for acknowledgement, but gives it freely. Mrs. Whitaker from the choir, who had been the first to murmur a blessing in my direction during the week the wedding happened, sat beside me folding biscotti into boxes for a bake sale. "There's a way you belong," she told me once, and I felt that line settle in like proper mortar. At home, the spoon found its new place at the front of the drawer, not because it was more important than the whisk or the rolling pin, but because visibility is a quiet form of respect. When I reach for it now, my fingers find the burn mark without looking, like a prayer that takes no words. Sometimes I take it out and hold it to the light and remember my mother's hips in the kitchen, the way she hummed without words, and counted in the margins of recipes. There were other ripples. Lydia became, slowly, an ally where she could be. She called me sometimes, not to coordinate a placement on a program, but to ask about a casserole tip or to invite me to a garden party where she wanted someone who understands underplantings. She was not suddenly my mirror. She kept some of her edges, but she learned to say Margaret without hesitation. Once, at a summer picnic they hosted to celebrate their first year of marriage, she stood up and announced that she wanted to thank Margaret Hayes, who brought the spoon that handles everything. She said it with a laugh and a kind of reverence that made everyone look at me like I'd done something brave. It was small and large at once, a public acknowledgement that names things right. Ashley and Jake's marriage settled into that peculiar, beautiful ordinariness of two people discovering their rhythms. They called me to troubleshoot a freezer that wouldn't ever quite close at the top, or to help pick a paint color that would not make Jake's tools look like an invasion. I taught Jake how to make my grandmother's lemon curd. He listened like a man who respects the rules of a recipe because he intends to replicate the blessing that comes from keeping them. Once, when they had friends over and someone complained in mock horror about the brand of cereal in the pantry, Ashley laughed and said, "It doesn't matter. We eat it together." In my neighborhood, the seasons changed in their predictable way, and the routine of my life got a few new lines. I started a small thing at the community center, an afternoon class called Simple Comforts, where I taught folks how to make dishes that feed more than hunger. We made cornbread casseroles and stews and a foolproof pound cake. People came with earnest hands and skeptical faces and left with recipes tucked into their pockets and a kind of boldness about their kitchens. There was a woman, young and fierce, who learned to make biscuits that rose so high she cried and called her mother to report the miracle. There was a retired teacher who'd never learned to make a pie and who, after a session, announced she might host a potluck. I watched the spoon move from hand to hand in that classroom and thought about lineage. The tool does not need a pedigree to do its work. It only needs to be used. There came a day in late October when Mrs. Green's hydrangeas had finally conceded to the frost and their stiff blooms bowed down in a kind of quiet surrender. I walked across the street with a tin of leftover soup and found her on the porch, bundled in a robe like a small monarch. "I thought you might come by," she said without preamble, because women who have known each other's winters long enough skip the small talk. She poured me tea and asked, "Are you still stirring?" I laughed and said, "Every morning." She reached out and touched my hand like she had when we were younger, when her children were still in elementary school and she'd send me over casseroles because the twins had chicken pox. "You know," she said, "you've been quiet about it, but it's changed some of us. How you stood up that night. It made my Margaret stand up a little straighter." She told me so. The acknowledgement was more profound than any formal award. It was a life lesson moving from person to person, like a passing bowl. That kind of ripple takes time, and you seldom notice it until someone tells you. Christmas that year was a pageant of small reconciliations. Ashley and Jake celebrated at our house because their first real tree fit nicely in my living room, and because they liked the idea of the quilt from Nana spread over the sofa when the movie started. Lydia came bearing pies and a careful tenderness. We sang out of tune and passed paper crowns, and I found myself in the middle of a room that felt almost deliberately arranged to remind me of everything that matters. People, music, food that's been stirred with hands big enough for two. At one point, Lydia and I stood side by side putting cranberries into a bowl for sauce, bending our mouths into retellings of the sewing stories our mothers told us. And then, with the kind of unplanned honesty that comes when you're rolling dough, she said, "Thank you for not making it ugly." "That's because ugly takes too much energy," I replied. "I'd rather make sauce." It is not to say that everything is easier now, or that no one ever slips back into old patterns. There are still small missteps. Someone will once again call me Margie, in a tone that feels like shorthand, rather than a name offered as respect. Sometimes the planner forgets to print my name in the program in the exact form I asked. Sometimes the world reduces us to tags we did not give ourselves. But the difference now is that I have an arsenal of small certainties to rely on. My daughter defending the place of her mother, a neighbor's voice in the choir, a church kitchen where I know the rhythm of the gravy ladle. There is also a newfound freedom that surprised me. The freedom from striving for everyone's approval. At 66, you discover that the chase for validation is a thin way to spend your time, and that the satisfaction of a day well stirred is not dependent on applause. When my sister Brenda calls from Ohio and asks what's new, I tell her about the baking class and the couple who wanted to learn lemon curd, and the woman from the shelter who now volunteers. She says, "You look different, Meg. You look like you sleep." Maybe it is the sleeping. Maybe it is the smaller things. I find joy in a bag of peas that pop perfectly, in the sound of the ice maker that used to annoy me now punctuating a quiet afternoon, in the way the light falls across the counter and spills onto a recipe card. I also discovered that when you set down one fight, particularly the fight that wants to win someone's respect by force, you open yourself to other ways of being fierce. I can be firm without being loud. I can insist on my name without framing it as a battle. I can, in short, be present in ways that matter to the people I love and to myself. There were, of course, moments of private recalibration. I kept my hand on the drawer where the spoon lives and counted the ways it had been used. The burn mark was a map of the years. The handle was worn to the exact shape of my palm, as if my hands and this bit of wood had been in conversation for decades. Sometimes, late at night, I would pull it out and run it across the rim of a pot like a child checking a heartbeat. It reassured me that the tools we inherit are not just objects. They are accumulations of care. Months passed, and the wedding's afterglow settled into a pattern. I still get the occasional shot of us on Facebook. Ashley and Jake at Christmas, their first garden tomatoes, a pancake breakfast where the spatters tell you someone loves syrup a lot. The quilt shows up in a photograph from their first movie night. The spoon, it turns out, has a sense of timing. Once, when they came over for Sunday supper, I left it on their coffee table after washing it and returning it in a dish towel. Later, Ashley texted me a photo. The spoon lay among popcorn kernels and a dog-eared romance novel, looking like it had decided to take a night off in the company of two people learning domesticity. I laughed and wrote back, "It's visiting." There is a particular pleasure in watching the next generation make recipes their own. My daughter invited me to a dinner where she and Jake tried to recreate a dish he loved as a child, something with chilies and cheese and a questionable amount of cumin. They overdid the spice, but the laughter around the table was a sound I would make space for on any calendar. Jake set the table with something he'd bought at a flea market, mismatched and earnest. When I went to help clear, I took the wooden spoon and handed it to Ashley. "Keep stirring," I said, and she did, like a benediction. My identity, I realized, is not a title on a program. It is a series of moments stitched together by habit and attention. I am immediate, because when my daughter needs me, she knows where to find me. Not because a printed list gave me a place of prominence. I am immediate because I learned to say my name, to show up, to make a blessing when there was no place reserved for one. I am immediate because I taught my daughter how to peel an apple so the slice comes off like a ribbon, and she taught me how to be loud in my own defense when necessary. Now, when someone asks me what I learned from that odd little season, I tell them that courage can be shaped like a spoon. It is not always something that requires a stage. It is the quiet resolve to stand when to stand is harder than to sit. It is the discipline of returning to the work you love, stirring, mending, feeding, not for acknowledgement, but because it is your work. Once you accept that your place is not granted by a seating chart, you are free to make 1,000 other choices that matter. Last Sunday I went by the shelter to help with a Thanksgiving prep. We were making stock from the bones left over from a donation, and I watched a young woman, maybe 20, with 2 toddlers crane her head to watch the pot. I stirred for a while and then handed her the spoon. "Here," I said. "Give it a try." She held it like you hold something passed down. Her hands were calloused differently than mine, but she found a rhythm, a small and perfect thrust, and the soup thickened under her motion. "My mom used to do this," she murmured. "She worked double shifts." "You're doing it now," I said. "You can teach it to someone else." That passing felt like everything. It was the spoon doing what spoons do best, moving what needs to be moved, binding ingredients into something whole. The woman looked up and smiled, and for a moment I saw the line of our lives reach forward and backward, stitching strangers into kin. Sometimes, when the world flattens my edges with its insistence on metrics and lists and glossy presentations, I open the drawer and look at the spoon. I rub its surface with my thumb and remember 1,000 small mercies. I remember speaking at that reception, and the way words, when they come from the right part of you, change more than the program. I remember Lydia's hand in mine over a bowl of batter, and Ashley's head on my shoulder when the porch light buzzed. I remember how the quilt is always needed, how a blanket can be a map. If you find something in this, if some part of my insistence gives you courage, then I would ask something small of you. Leave a comment about the spoon in your life, a recipe, a mother, an ordinary object that taught you who you are. Tell me when you decided to stop waiting for permission and to claim your place. If this touched you, press like so someone else walking into an unexpected silence might see a signal that they're not alone. And if you want to keep hearing how everyday people find their voice in kitchens and church basements and borrowed chairs, subscribe. Walk along with us for a while. There are more recipes to share and more spoons to hand off. I will end where I began, with the image that has kept me steady. An old wooden spoon, worn and warm in my hand, not loud but reliable. It taught me that to be immediate is less about being announced and more about being present. It taught me that you do not have to shout to be heard. Sometimes you simply stir until the lumps smooth and the cake rises, and then you pass a slice. Keep your name close. Keep your hands working. Keep the light on the porch for those who will come seeking you. And when life asks you to step up, take the spoon and stir until what needs to rise, rises.